Hello, everybody, and we're back for Who Are You? And the man in the seat is Joe Morrison. Joe is one of football's best kept secrets, a quality presenter for many years, and now doing quality projects with La Liga on Facebook. How are you, Big Joe?
Marvelous. Kevin Joseph Campbell. I'm marvelous.
Did you like that? Did you like that intro, Joe?
I did actually. Yeah, it was my chest was puffing.
It was puffing
as,
out.
As puffing out as. By the way, where does Joseph come from? Your middle name?
The Bible.
It's not like named after a family member or anything like that.
No, the Bible. Joseph. Yeah, come on, man, Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
You know my colours. You're a Technicolor dream, boy. You know how that works.
I've seen you in some very salubrious coats and jackets, so yes.
Yeah, you've seen enough of me. You have over the years. Let's be honest. But Joe, it's really nice to have you on, mate. And you're a big Toon fan, aren't you? You're Newcastle man.
Massive. But the thing is, Kev, when you're in my position, you kind of have to. Well, actually, I'll tell you quickly. When I first joined the BBC, there was a big thing about maintaining your neutrality as a presenter or as a commentator. You couldn't let on who you supported. Now, fast forward 20 years later, and everybody wants to know who you are and what you stand for, who you are.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Who are you? Yeah.
Who are you? Who you are, what you stand for, and most importantly, who your club is. So, yes, Newcastle United, born and bred.
All right, Joe, look, let's get straight into it because we've got quite a few things to cover on these 10 questions. Can you remember your first game at church, Newcastle at St. James's Park? Can you remember it, mate?
I can't remember it. I think it was in the 90s, and I think it was kind of a year or two. I've got a terrible memory, as you well know.
That's why I make sure I ask you.
Kev, I don't know what I was doing last week, man. Never mind 30 years ago. There's something in the back of my. I think it was that I'm absolutely sure of. I think it was maybe about 94. It was kind of a year or two before the entertainers, were setting the world on fire. So I think it was maybe 93, 94. It was certainly the Premier League when they moved into the Premier League, which I think was the 93 season, wasn't it? The Newcastle
93. Yeah, 93.
So it was maybe 94. However, there's something in my deepest, darkest memory that suggests that I was taken to a game by my uncle back in the 80s, but I don't really remember it, to be honest with you. So
you were there for the Coca-Cola and hot dogs.
Hey, there was a lot more. Right, so I think it's still there. There was a van of death. They called it the van of death. Now, before you say anything, every football fan who's watching this, who has gone religiously for the past 20, 30 years to their club, their stadium, no matter what stadium it is or what club it is, they know about the van of death. And the van of death is that little mobile kitchen unit that made hamburgers and hot dogs, which I'm sure if one of these government health inspectors went and had a look today, or even one of these TV nutritionists, which are 10 a penny nowadays, if they went to have a look at what was in those hamburgers and hot dogs and kebabs, that's why it was called the van of death. It smelt amazing, Kev, amazing, with the the shoveling the onions
and stuff, yeah.
And the little layer of cheese, but no, it did nothing for me from a nutritional point of view. The van of death.
The van of death. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure every club has one. I'm sure they do. Joe, who was your favourite player growing up?
Oh, I had 2 or 3, and I had one in particular. And it was Peter Beardsley. However, when Peter went to Liverpool, I was torn. And I understand, obviously, we go out to a global audience, you and I. And as you well know, the global football fans, most of them have 2 clubs.
Yeah.
So they'll have, like, say, 1 Premier League club and they'll support Real Madrid or Barcelona or Juventus now because Ronaldo's there. But in my day, and I don't know what it was like for you, but in my day, it was sacrilege to have to support anyone else other than your own team.
Oh, without a shadow.
Without a shadow of a doubt. So for me, like, I was Newcastle through and through, but when Peter Beardsley left to go to Liverpool, I have to admit that I kind of, I had a soft spot, shall we say. I have to be very
Tread
diplomatic.
carefully here, Joe.
I have to be diplomatic. I must admit, I had a soft spot for Liverpool for a short time when Peter Beardsley was there. And Gaza, Gaza was just, and I've been so privileged to work with Peter Beardsley and work with Gaza, and never knowing, I'm one of these people, Kev, like I have a real, what's the word, a real sense about sliding doors moments, and to work with these guys years later, when if you'd asked me way back at that time, to sort of like say, can you ever imagine at some point in your future when you're a 10-year-old kid, you'll be working with Peter Beardsley or Gaza or Kevin Joseph Campbell?
True, there you go, Joe. Get me in there, mate.
No way.
No way, I know. Listen. But we're going to go on to something else. You actually worked for Newcastle United.
Yeah.
What was it like working at Newcastle and working with a legend like Sir Bobby Robson?
I get asked this question on a regular basis. Not a lot, but a regular basis. And I can honestly say it was the worst job of my life to date, but the most amazing experience. And I mean that from a career point of view. And the reason I say that is because there was a lot of political turmoil at Newcastle United at that time. Remember, this was just a few years before it was eventually sold to Mike Ashley. Yeah. They weren't swimming in cash like they were in the Sir John Hall era of the 90s. Behind the scenes, there was a lot of political maneuvering going on. Obviously, Freddie Shepherd and the Shepherd family, they were trying to gain more and more control of Newcastle United. Sir John Hall was becoming more ailing and was stepping back from the club. And he was, let's make no bones about this, Sir John Hall was the brains behind the renaissance of Newcastle United, not anybody else. And don't let anyone tell you. Now, on the pitch, obviously, that was manifested through the amazing exuberance of Kevin Keegan, but it was Sir John. So those 4 years I was there, we were in the Champions League every year, except for the last year, which was under Graham Souness, and we're in what is now the equivalent of the Europa League. And I don't know if you remember at that time as well, the Champions League was a double group stage.
Yeah.
So if you survived the first group stage, there was, I think there were 6 teams in each group at that stage, and the bottom 2 dropped out. So you just had to finish in the top 4 of the group, and then you went through to the second group stage, which was in the early part of the year.
Yeah.
So it was planes, trains, and automobiles all over Europe under Sir Bobby Robson. You want to know how much traveling we did? I was lucky to travel with the team as well, and that was one of the greatest experiences of my life, because it made me see the other side, and it made me see the players' side. And I didn't know at that time, but later on in my career, it would come back and help me, because it gave me a greater understanding of the inner workings of a club behind the scenes. The press and the media don't see what goes on the team bus, on the team flight, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but just to go to show you how much traveling we did, my utility bills, Kev, my electricity and gas and everything, were averaging £10 a month.
Stick! Stick!
It was like I was getting back home, putting my washing in the washing machine, washing it, drying it as quickly as possibly I could, and then it would be back to the airport, whether it would be to go, to get on a little charter flight down to Biggin Hill.
London,
just outside of London. I always remember Biggin Hill, which is for those who don't know, Biggin Hill is I think it was a World War II RAF base.
RAF base, yeah.
Where they used to park Spitfires, and then it's turned into like a private airport for all the big wigs and the wealthy people around the world who fly their private jets in, and obviously don't go to Heathrow. So, or down to Southampton, or back to Europe, or getting on the bus and heading on a Friday, getting on the bus and heading over to Manchester way. So it was, as I say, fabulous experience, but the worst job.
What was your job, Joe?
So I was working at the BBC before that, and then I went to Newcastle United to head up their TV channel.
Right.
And you remember at that time, it's deja vu. This at that time, the internet, in terms of broadcasting on the internet, was in its infancy. Yeah. It was still 56K, Kev. It was still dial-up. You know,
wow.
do you remember when you turned your computer on? It was that.
Yeah. Talking to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it was talking to you. So what was the company called? It was called Premium TV, and it's now the Perform Group. And Perform Group, as it is in its current guise, is one of the biggest online broadcasters on the planet. They own DAZN, which obviously has the rights to Bundesliga, Italian leagues, and Premier League as well.
Canelo and all that, don't they? They signed Canelo and.
So
Anthony
this was
Joshua.
the boxing. Yeah, they've got big boxing rights. So this was their previous incarnation was Premium TV, and then they changed their name. So this was in the early days of that. So basically what they were looking for, because they were putting a small team together, they needed someone who could sort of had a bit of production knowledge, who could, had a bit of business understanding. Don't know why they picked me. And who could also go in front of camera as well. So I took the leap. Everyone said I was mad to do it at the time. They said I was ending my career by doing it. And in hindsight, that's proven not to be the case. But I didn't know that at that time. It was a punt. All I saw in my head was I was realizing that if you wanted to expand your broadcast network, you had to get more players' names and numbers and relationships into your little black book, for want of a phrase. And that was the area I was struggling in. So for me, I thought, you know what, I could even go and do this for a year, build up relationships with the players, and then take that on somewhere else. So yeah, it was. And in those days, Kev, the size of the screen, like look at us on this screen now. You're looking at your laptop. Look how clear it is. I can see that moisturizer on your forehead, Kevin Campbell. That's how clear the picture is now. In those days, it was because of 56K. It was the size of the screen couldn't be any bigger than a credit or debit card. And also it was pixelated. It would be milky. It would
grainy.
Be fuzzy. Yeah, grainy. So we could, when we went to Europe, when we were sending these interviews and stuff back, we could only put up 30 seconds of the interview because that's all really that the internet could handle in terms of streaming that at the time. And I'll never forget, we used to go to bed, midnight, 1 a.m. in some far-flung place like Sarajevo. And because internet connections in Europe were no better and sometimes worse than the UK, like you would start uploading it. Remember, this is 30 seconds. It's totally bonkers now when you think about it. 30 seconds of content, we'd upload it or start uploading at midnight. It would usually finish about 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning. Bonkers, eh?
Wow. Joe, look, that's great. But Joe, here's a question for you. You're a big Newcastle man, and I need to ask you this. Do you think Newcastle under Kevin Keegan should have won the league with that great team?
Oh, yeah, of course. To be 12 points ahead. Yeah, without a question of a doubt. Without a question of a doubt. And you know, the bit that is always... you never know. So you were talking about Sir Bobby Robson and working under Sir Bobby. I mean, an amazing experience from an amazing guy. Yeah. And I have to be honest with you, Kev, here, and it hurts me to say this. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I didn't appreciate the hours, and it was hours that I spent with him. But Sir Bobby used to talk on a regular basis about what-if moments. And his what-if moment, and he would repeat this on many occasions, his what-if moment was that penalty shootout against West Germany in the 1990 World Cup. My what-if moment is, what if Newcastle had won the league that year? It doesn't matter what the sport, and you and I are both watching The Last Dance, the Chicago Bulls, and you've probably already, the same as me, watched the early episodes when they were talking about getting that first trophy.
Yeah, across the line.
Getting that first title, coming so close. Remember, they were in the playoffs, weren't they? They were in the playoff final. Yeah. Before a couple of years before, was it?
Yeah.
So if they had won the league that season, Newcastle United would be a completely different club, like today, yesterday, last year, the year
True.
before. It would have changed the whole dynamic
Yeah.
of Newcastle as a city, Newcastle United as a club. And you can't even say to me, yes, but there might have just been another Blackburn. No. Completely different scenario. Blackburn, a tiny town, an amazing feat, by the way, Jack Walker, etc. But Newcastle, it's a one-team city, and it's the lifeblood of the whole of the Northeast. So, of course they should have won it. But it's pressure. As you know, it's handling pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is handling pressure. Joe, what made you get into broadcasting stroke presenting? What made you get in? Or was it just a choice of what you were good at?
It definitely wasn't a choice. I ask myself the same question. So every
is
night
that because you work with Budgie and I?
Correct. Absolutely correct. I asked myself, why did I do this? And before I switch the light out at night, I have a little cry to myself in that little moment of darkness. Just before I fall asleep, and I go, please, I say a little prayer, like, please, dear God, take me out of this. No, on a serious note. So basically, I don't know if you know this, but my degree, I went to university in Aberdeen, which is a cold and dark place for half of the year. And I did agriculture. So I qualified as a farmer. I'm actually a qualified farmer. So when I came out in the early 90s, there was a recession then, and there was no jobs going. And my father had been made redundant as well. So what he did with his redundancy check, he bought a little newsagent shop.
Right.
And he said, do you want to come in it with me and work in it and stand behind the till and sort out newspaper rounds and all the rest of it. And I said, I had no choice. Because there were no jobs, I had no choice. So I just went, did it. And I was in there for quite a few years. And there was a guy who used to come in and pick up his papers every morning called Whispering George. His name was George Bailey.
Right.
And it's amazing the circles of life, Kev. My favorite Christmas movie is It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
And one of the main characters in that is George Bailey. So this guy, George Bailey, was one of the pioneers of BBC Radio 5 Live. There was a group of guys that got together and said, we want to create a sport-only channel. This is way back in the day. This was probably, I don't know, someone will watch this and correct me and Google it, but I think BBC Radio 5 Live started in the very late 80s, if not the early 90s. So he used to come in every day, Whispering George Bailey. He was a commentator for 5 Live, and he was one of the commentators that pioneered golf on the radio. Right. Because people had said up to that point, you can't do golf on the radio because it's a very quiet sport. You're not allowed to talk and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from him about the production process because he used to come in, he was a real early riser. So he used to come into the shop literally when we first opened, which was 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And we'd talk sport. And for the best part of 2 years, maybe it was more than that. I can't be sure of my dates, but he would say like, he says, you know your sport, you're well read on your sport, and you've got a great voice. You should, I'll come and get you a trial at the BBC. So he worked at the BBC in the Northeast, and then obviously also worked with Radio 5 Live in London. And I was like, no, it's not my bag. It's not my thing. I'm not really into it. And he just did that on and off, not regularly, but on and off for 2 to 3 years. And then eventually one day I said, okay, what do I do? And he said, right, you need to get into hospital radio and I'll get you a couple of ins, so to speak, at the BBC in the Northeast, get you a couple of contacts to meet people. And the rest, as they say, is history. So it was thanks to Whispering George Bailey that seed was planted in my mind.
What were you like at the start, Joe?
As in what I was like at broadcasting?
Hospital radio.
I was shit.
No, it's all right. No, it's for adults, mate. Don't worry about that.
Honestly, I was bloody garbage. But there's a couple of things I need to tell you. One is I never forget people that helped me way back when. And I might not be able to to repay the debt, so to speak, at that time. But years later, I'll always make sure that I do. So one is Doddy Weir, who, bless him, is battling motor neurone disease at the moment. I had sent...
He's a rugby player, isn't he? Scottish rugby player.
The former Scotland international, big guy, always a cheery face, famous for his tartan suits. Amazing, amazing guy. But I'd written round so many sports stars, football players, to try and get interviews. So the producer of this hospital radio show said, look, I'm going to give you this slot on a Saturday afternoon. It's going to be a mixture of music, and then read out the sports news, the results, what's going on, etc., etc. I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And he says, if you can get some interviews, great. So I'd written around all these sports stars in the Northeast, and not one of them gave me a reply, except for, and I'd sent a lot out, by the way. It must have been in the hundreds. And Doddy Weir was the only one that replied. And he said, yeah, sure. So I went along one day with my little tape recorder and interviewed Doddy Weir. So that was kind of the early days. And George Bailey, who's no longer with us, would you believe how things come full circle? The last time I sat down with Sir John Hall was at George Bailey's funeral.
Wow.
Sir John Hall. So that's how much he was held in high esteem. Sir John Hall, just by pure chance, Sir John Hall and I were sitting next to each other at the crematorium in Newcastle.
Oh, that's a good story, that, Joe. I didn't know you used to sell fags and coke and crisps. There you go.
That's another podcast another day.
Oh, I'm telling you.
All of that, 20 Benson and Hedges, no one said Benson and Hedges. They used to say 20 B&H. Or Regal Kings, 20 Regal Kings.
Any old Oldburn?
Old Oldburn. And they used to slap those comments that, by the way, when you do it for so many years, especially through winter, it's 6 a.m. in the morning, the folk that used to come in and go, I forget what a packet of fags was then. I think it was about £1.42 or £2.42, something like that. They say, £1.42, please. How much for cash? The same joke every day. And you used to go, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, wind you up in the end.
Yeah.
So, Joe, you've worked around the globe. How is English football perceived around the world? And what's it like being famous or more famous outside of England, but not as famous or not quite as famous at home?
Well, let me answer the second part first. The fame or infamy is brilliant. And I'll tell you why it's brilliant. Because I made a conscious decision to pursue my career away from the UK, because at the time that I left the UK to get, to further my broadcasting career, there wasn't YouTube and all of these other platforms there are now that you could broadcast on. So it's a very, very tiny marketplace, very competitive. And you're waiting for dead man's shoes, for want of a phrase.
Yeah.
You have to work so many years and then hope that the Des Lynams in this world retire so that the Gary Linekers can move into a position and then someone can come in to do what Gary Lineker was doing, or whatever channel you were at, Sky Sports. Same with reporting, etc. So the fame bit I love because, yes, when I walk out the airport in Delhi or Bombay or Singapore or whatever, you get that recognition. And as you know, anyone that says they don't do it for a bit of recognition or they don't feel the buzz or they don't care is a liar, to be quite frank. It's a great little buzz.
Yeah.
And it's, everyone wants to be recognized for what they do. But the other side of it, which is great at having the best of both worlds, Kev, is I can come back to Blighty, stagger out of a bar at 2 a.m., barf on the pavement because I've drank too much, and no one knows who I am. And that is the upshot and the benefit of being, having both sides of it, not being famous back home and being famous somewhere else in the world. The first part of your question was
how is football perceived? Yeah, around the globe where you were.
I think it's changed massively. It used to infuriate me when I first came over here to broadcast, which was 16 years ago. Yeah. Commercial at football clubs, and we'll just stay on football. Commercial at football clubs was very local. So you used to always see the advertising hoardings, Kev, around the grounds, like Pucker Pies and Jamie's Tiles and Patterson Ford. Like, if you're watching and the Premier League was first broadcast properly in 99-2000 season to the rest of the globe, and especially Southeast Asia, people will be looking at these advertising hoardings and going, what's Pucker Pies? What, who are Jamie's Tiles?
Yeah.
So commercially, it's changed massively, and it's now a global game. Unfortunately, there are still some in football, and I'm not talking about the big clubs, they're pretty smart. I'm talking about the lesser clubs who still don't understand that this game belongs not just to the 52,000, for take Newcastle an example, that are coming into the ground this weekend, but it also belongs to all those who are watching around the rest of the globe. And there should be no differentiation between the two. Now, the argument, Kev, is like, well, wait a second, these lads pay for their season tickets and they turn up every week, to watch Newcastle United or Wolves or Manchester United or whatever. Yeah, but hold on a second. I can give you 100 examples, if not more, 1,000 examples of people who save up for their one trip to the UK, 2 flights plus hotels over a weekend and all the attributed costs to go see a game. And those same fans are the ones who are watching the Premier League at 3 a.m. in Hong Kong or Japan or Singapore, or staying up to watch the Champions League until 3 or 4 a.m. in Delhi or Bombay. So it's a purely global game, and the Premier League is the centerpiece of that because it's the one that's the most advanced out of all of the leagues in Europe. So the biggest thing that has changed, however, has been when I first came over here and when it was first being broadcast, there was an obsession with the Premier League as an entire product. So even if you were a Man United fan and you were watching Man United against Bournemouth, like, there was a huge appetite. Now that appetite has gone a little bit. So they only want to see Manchester United against Liverpool, Liverpool against Chelsea, Man City against
big games, the really big games.
The really big games. The appetite for the smaller games has dropped off quite considerably in the last few years. I've noticed anyway.
Well, that's quite significant. Joe, what's your take on Newcastle and the takeover? Because I know obviously you've been on the inside. What's your thoughts on all that, Mike Ashley and?
You're making my arse twitch here, Kev, because the deal's not done. Seriously,
but just what's your thoughts? Listen, whether it happens or I'm not saying whether it happens. I'm just saying, what's your thoughts on it? Is this been a long time coming? Mike Ashley, get out of our club and all that, is it?
I am going to put a huge disclaimer before I say anything else here, because I am seriously superstitious. So I don't want to say anything that is going to jeopardize. No, the thing is, first of all, Mike Ashley's time was done. There's no ifs or buts about that. I think it was correct. And looking back now with hindsight, the club did need to be handed on at the time that Mike Ashley took it over, because, the way Newcastle was being run financially at the time that I left, they were robbing Peter to pay Paul. They were advancing money from sponsorship deals to get the likes of Michael Owen, for example. Well, that was unsustainable. You couldn't continue with that kind of financial model. So Mike Ashley, has he done anything good, anything bad for the club? Well, this is where the camps are split. And I'm going to ruffle a few feathers here, because even though I'm not a Mike Ashley fan, which I'm not.
Go on, Joe, ruffle them.
You have to acknowledge that he will hand that club over debt-free. And that's a big thing to say. And it's a big thing to say when Leeds are fighting to get back in the Premier League after all this time. Portsmouth, gone.
Yeah.
Where are Portsmouth now? Away in the
League
middle
One.
of nowhere. Sunderland, where are they now?
League One.
When I was at Newcastle United, the Sunderlands, if someone had said to me that, oh, by the way, in 15 years' time, Sunderland will be in League One and may never get back to the Premier League. And I'm not just talking about the hardcore Sunderland fans. You'd say, like, bollocks, you don't know what you're talking about. So all the criticism of Mike Ashley, much of it is justified. He has not reinvested in the club in recent years. I think that's because the love affair went sour. He's made bad decisions in terms of the people that he got to run the club, except for Chris Mort in the early days. And actually, in fact, they've tried to get Chris Morton back, haven't they? They've approached him to run the club again, but I think he's turned it down. But so to be able to hand the club on debt-free, which gives the new owners a springboard to really take the club on to the next level, is a great thing. And you have to acknowledge that from Mike Ashley and take the emotion of what you feel about what he's done with the club in recent years out of it. And I do. Now, what's next? I think people don't realize what's coming next. I think there are two parts to it, Kev. One is financial fair play is going to limit what happens unless they do something different. And I think that what you will see with Newcastle is, and this is why the Reuben brothers are involved, in my opinion, they already own Newcastle Racecourse, which has got a huge amount of land around it. And they're developers. That's their background. Yeah. They are property developers. I think Newcastle, Kev, and I'm not saying this biased, I'm saying it like with a clear head. It's an undervalued city. When you go and look, big time. So take the club out of the equation. The city, it has not had decent enough development since the 90s.
Yeah.
You go and compare it to Liverpool or Leeds or Manchester. They are years ahead of Newcastle in terms of infrastructure, the city itself and its development, business, commerce, all of those kind of things. It's become a little sleepy backwater. And I'm hoping that what the Saudi deal does is it puts this huge spotlight onto Newcastle as a city. And I think that's a great thing because it's not just a focus on the club, it's a focus on the city. And when you look at Manchester City itself, look at what the Abu Dhabi group consortium did to that whole area around the Etihad Stadium. It wasn't just about the stadium and buying expensive players, it was about the whole area.
And it's still going, Joe. It's still going. Yeah. And
it's still going, you know. Property, I think is it after oil? Property is the biggest business on the planet. And you know, property development and property is the biggest business on the planet. It's one of those kind of stats. So these guys aren't stupid. They know there's an opportunity not just to develop Newcastle as a club, but to ride on the back of that, developing the surrounding area of Newcastle City as a place. So, yeah, really excited. Really, really excited.
You're really exciting time, Joe. So, Joe, what's the 3 things you would change to improve Newcastle United? 3 things.
Just the club.
Yeah, just the club. Just the club. 3 things.
First of all, training ground. The training ground of Newcastle United was formerly an old British Gas. It was actually Northern Gas, I think. Remember when British Gas was back in the day? It was a former British Gas sports club, and they took that over. And it is way behind any other Premier League training facility in England. So the training facilities are just not up to scratch by any way, shape or form, stretch of the imagination. So that's one, training ground. Secondly, I would make sure that Newcastle are on the global map. And what do I mean by that? Is I wouldn't be looking to win a trophy in the first 1, 2, 3 seasons. I would be looking to play entertaining football. Why? Because I was brought up in that era of the entertainers where they didn't win anything, but you went all over the world and they were everybody's second favorite team, which brings us back to the early part of the conversation whereby most of the global audience now, because they weren't born in that city and they weren't taken to the club by their dad or you know, their brother or whatever, they can have a second team. And the second team is always going to be the most entertaining team.
An entertaining team, yeah, of course.
It's as simple as that. So I would make sure that you're bringing in a coach and a manager who is looking at entertaining football. And don't let Budgie see this, by the way. And that means no Jose Mourinho. I'm sorry to say.
No, keep him well out. Keep him way away.
So that would be number 2, looking at the global fan base. And number 3, I would go for a superstar signing. Now, you know me, Kev, and you know that's not normally my thinking. But times have changed, and you'd be a total and utter fantasist if you suggested this just 2 seasons ago. Never mind now. Ronaldo or Messi, I would go for them. And I'll tell you why I would go for them. Messi, very, very unhappy at Barcelona, has a clause in his contract to leave at the end of every season. Yes, his salary would be massive, but when you're getting the best player, and factor this in again, most entertaining player on the planet, I would go for him because €1 million a week is doable. It's doable. Ronaldo, obviously Juventus are on a little bit of a sticky period financially. Ronaldo is having second thoughts about staying in Italy. And Ronaldo is also looking for his final payday. Again, you know.
He's still fit. He's still got the name. He still scores goals. You get him in.
Yeah, and you could bring him in. You know, Ronaldo is the type, and his agent Jorge Mendes is of the type where they're looking for decent contract. They wouldn't take anyone in on a 1 year, pay as you play deal. This is Ronaldo, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
Ronaldo is fit enough to play until he's 40. That's how well he looks after himself.
Yeah.
So I would give him that 2 or 3 year deal. And why? Because he brings the global eyes with him.
Well, the infrastructure would have to be in place because people would be flying in to watch these guys, won't they?
And you just go and look at the data, and you know I like the data. Go and look at the data of the shirt sales, the commerce when Ronaldo arrived at Juventus. And bearing in mind that even though they had a 20% jump, he was announced very late. Season tickets had already been sold, you know? Can you imagine if you'd bumped the price a little bit of the season tickets and then seen what the numbers would be because you'd announced Ronaldo 2 months before? You knew he was coming. You know, Ronaldo's deal happened
pretty
quite late in the day. Yeah. So that would say, and you have to understand the mentality of the Arabs, the wealthy Arabs here. We're here. We've arrived.
Statement. Yeah.
It's a statement of intent. Exactly. A big statement of intent. So I hope that answers the question.
That's a great answer, Joe.
Is that 3, by the way? I've lost count.
Yeah, that's 3. That was your 3rd. We've got 2 questions to go, Joe. What's it like presenting on a different platform like Facebook? What's it like compared to the normal?
Brilliant. And I'll tell you why. And there'll be people who are watching this and saying, oh, well, of course, you know, they're your current employers. You've got to say they're brilliant. No. Put that aside. Put the sentiment aside. I wish we'd had this platform 10 years ago. Now, it would have been a lot more difficult 10 years ago because the speed of infrastructure was not as good as it is now. Yeah. And we've got 5G coming down the line in the next few years. But I tell you why it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it allows us to bring the audience into the show direct and live. And what I mean by that is they are part of the conversation in real time. So when you see TV programs now, sport shows, let's stick with sport shows, and they involve social media and they say, send us your tweets or send us your comments. I'm telling you, 99% of them, in fact, almost all of them, it's pre-prepared. So what they do is they put a request out on their social media platforms that day. Maybe it's a few hours before the show. Maybe it's 24 hours before the show. We've got Kevin Campbell tomorrow night. Send us your questions. Well, that response can be up to 24 hours old. So a question I have for Kev is from 24 hours ago or 12 hours ago or whatever. The thing is, Kev, you've played the game and you are now broadcasting on the game. You tell me what you do. Someone will say that during your career, what you do, your job was to put the ball in the back of the net. Well, technically, yes, it was. But what you did, not your job, what you did was you rode emotion. That's what you did, both for yourself and for the crowd that turned up, the fans that turned up. You were giving them an emotion and you were trying to feed your own appetite for emotion. Why? Because you get an amazing buzz, don't you, Kev, when you 100%. Put the ball in the back of the net?
100%.
And when you don't score, your team loses, you've got no emotion. So to put this in perspective, emotion is what it's all about. So when a red card is given in a game, I want to ride that emotion of the audience and us in the studio as well, and get the instantaneous reaction, because when that red card, let's say it's an injustice, when that red card is given, the emotions are at their absolute maximum. However, if I ask you for your response, your reaction, your emotion, Kev, 2 hours after the game, you've calmed down a little bit.
Yeah.
It was still an injustice,
Yeah.
but it was not the worst fucking injustice on
Yeah.
the planet.
The fires died down.
Correct. So to talk about the platform, it has two real unique components. One is global reach, obviously. I mean, I think there's now, is it 2.7 billion people on the planet have Facebook? So you've got this huge reach, which you can get all over the world. And the second is, and we haven't even scratched the surface with the tools that are going to be available to us to grab that audience. You are able to, within seconds, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but I think it's approximately 6 seconds or something, maybe 10 seconds from someone typing into the show, you know, or messaging the show, and for me to be able to read it on air. So that emotion...
It's instantaneous virtually. Instantaneous virtually, yeah.
Instantaneous. And that's why these platforms, I think, are the future of sport, because sport is all about emotion. And Kev, this is the only thing on the planet where you walk into as an audience member, as a fan, even as a participant, and do not know what emotion you're going to walk out with.
True.
When you go to the game, you don't know whether it's win, lose, or draw. So you're paying for an emotion which you don't get. So to put it in perspective, Kev, if I go to the theater or I go to see a concert or whatever, when I go to see the Rolling Stones, I know the emotion I'm going to get.
Yeah.
I'm not going to come out in tears and anger and frustration. I'm going to hear their greatest hits and, you know, the same with the theater. I know the play. I know the actors. I know the emotion I'm going to come out with. I'm going to have a nice evening listening to music, you know, going to a concert of classical music. I know what I'm paying for when I buy my ticket. With sport, you have no clue.
It's that roller coaster. It's a roller coaster in the dark.
It's the most bizarre thing, and yet people still do it. There are still tens of thousands, obviously not capacity, because some fall by the wayside and say, I'm not going to pay for this emotion. But there are still tens of thousands that are turning up to the Stadium of Light to watch Sunderland. Yeah, still.
Of course.
And the emotions that they're coming out with are more negative than positive over the last few seasons. So, but they still go. It's a phenomenal
draw.
Business room.
It's brilliant, isn't it? It is a brilliant draw. Last but not least, Joe, we're at number 10, and it's flown by. With the current economic situation, Joe, do you think football will possibly change for the better?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know is the honest answer. I'm inclined to say, Kev, yes and no. I'll tell you what is going to change for the better, I think, and I put this on social media a couple of weeks back. The games being played behind closed doors is going to change sport for the better, and I'll tell you why. Because in recent years, there's been a bit of an ambivalence towards the fans, and I'm talking about the fans in the stadium.
Yeah.
Not a bit of an ambivalence, a real ambivalence. Players, you know, the fans are the fans. They're there.
Not bothered.
Shirts and not bothered. You know, don't change my life. You ask your average player nowadays, and they would never admit this publicly, what's most important to them? Agent, close family, and bank manager maybe. You know, it's their close friends. They're close
knit circle.
Family, their close-knit circle. The rest, not interested in, don't care. There are one or two exceptions to that rule, by the way. There are one or two that really do have want to increase their connection with the fans. And you got to separate yourself from this, Kev, because you came through an era whereby you could still, after a match, go into a pub and have a beer with fans, and no one was going to stitch you up and take a photo with their iPhone 11 with its super duper 100 pixel camera and send that to a newspaper for you to be stitched up in next day's news. There wasn't such a thing as mobile phone cameras. And when they did come in towards the end of your career, Kev, you know, the cameras on them were not good enough to get a photo in a...
All right, Joe, my disguise, I had a disguise on. No, but you're right. You're right.
You know what? So that relationship is completely broken in recent years, and it's become even further and further apart. Now, I've singled out the players, but it also applies to the others as well. The commercial aspects of football clubs. Yeah, we're going to get 52,000 fans in our stadium, and we're going to milk them for pies and pints and all the rest of it.
Shirts and scarves,
shirts, scarves, etc., etc. And season tickets, yeah, we're going to put them up by the same percentage every year, you know, because we're in a business. It's a business. It's a business. I think they will need to relook at fans and the fan experience and start to appreciate the fans and say, and this is players as well, and start to say, players will go, you know what? It is fucking shit playing in an empty stadium.
Without them.
Have you played in an empty stadium?
I played in an empty stadium.
Behind closed doors?
Not really behind closed doors, but I played in empty stadium. And do you know when you're coming through the ranks?
What did it feel like? What did it feel like?
Well, here's the funny thing, you know, Joe. When you're coming through the ranks, and back in the day, we're in the combination, and there was a Central League, etc., and you played it at the stadiums, and they're empty. Because you're trying to make it, it don't bother you. But when you make the first team and then you go back and play in the reserves, you're right about the emotion. Because there's nobody there, there's nothing for you to hitch your wagon on to ride you through the game.
Correct.
It's got to be all self-motivation.
Correct.
And that's so difficult when you've actually played. And I think you're right. You make a really good point. These players are going to they're going to find it tough.
Yeah. And I don't think they realize yet. And I mean that seriously. Even though there's many players that are saying like, oh, you know, obviously it'd be better off we play in front of the fans. They're just platitudes that they're saying at the moment. You do not fully appreciate that till they play their first game, you know, Barcelona at the Camp Nou. And remember, those stadiums are bigger.
Huge, yeah.
So the bigger the stadium, the even more empty it becomes. So that was a bit Alan Partridge, that statement, wasn't it? The bigger the stadium, the more empty it is. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying.
So I think once they've played 1, 2, 3 games behind closed doors or in empty stadiums, they'll go like, wow, we need to reconnect with the fan base. And I think you'll start seeing things like clubs being more proactive financially in their relationship with the fans, and clubs being more proactive and players being more proactive in using these tools like Zoom and like Insta Live to go live with maybe 1 fan per week, or using Zoom to go live with a collection of fans and have, they call it in America the town hall experience, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is where the president or the president-elect on the campaign trail can sit down with a group of, you know, like 100 supporters or 100 people and chat to them about their concerns and how they feel. I think you'll see more of that in the coming weeks, months, years off the back of this crisis. So I think that's the positive. The negative is I think it will do damage to the weak of the herd. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of football clubs, especially down the lower echelons of the leagues all over Europe, not just England, who are on the brink before this, Kev, and they're going to go out of business. And I'm probably the wrong person to ask this because I'm a bit more brutal in my response, which is, you know, we didn't start our beloved sport of football 100 and whatever it was, 130, 50 years ago with 92 clubs. That was not how football began. It began with 2 teams, literally.
Yeah.
So there has become in recent years almost this psyche, Kev, that we have a right to exist as a football club. Well, no, you don't. You know, just because you've got a football club here, which has 500 people turn up to it, but 5 miles down the road, there's another one. And then 10 miles down the road, further than that, there's another football club who says, you know, all 3 of you have the right to exist in a professional
capacity. Yeah.
Capacity. I'm not talking about amateur clubs. Yes, of course. You know, we can have thousands of amateur clubs, but in a professional capacity, I think we're going to see a lot of people fall by the way, a lot of clubs fall by the wayside. And as well, Kev, I think it's going to, and Budgie will love this, I think it's going to result as well in a bit of a trimming of the fat of the commercial side of clubs themselves, you know. It's great that the game has moved forward in terms of nutrition and science and all the rest of it. But, oh, Kev, come on, man. There are some people that are employed at clubs for the sake of being employed at clubs, just to tick a box and say, you know, we have this department.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, another suit in the building. I hate suits in football. I hate them. I hate suits in football television. I hate suits that are involved in the game. There are some people that are not taking the game forward. They're not contributing. All they're doing is they're riding the coattails and they're another salary. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do you need girls in the ticket office? Absolutely, you need the girls in the ticket office because you have to sell season tickets and you need people to do that. Do you need someone who needs to be a full-time employee, Kev, to feng shui players' houses and apartments because it would help their perspective on the game? I mean, even part-time. I mean, seriously?
Oh,
off, man.
Joe.
By the way, I'm being facetious, Kev. But
No,
you know
but Joe,
what
I've never even had a feng shui anywhere near me, mate. I tell you. So don't worry about that.
I had a feng shui last night. It was a takeaway order. It was delicious. It was absolutely fabulous.
Joe, listen, top class, mate. Absolute. This is only part one, by the way, because we have to do this again. No, we have to do this again for, you know, whether it's the next season, probably we'll do it again and get part two with you, mate. Because
the next time we will be together, inshallah, in Spain.
In Spain.
Live.
On Facebook.
On Facebook, watch live to the Indian subcontinent Asia. That's the next time I'll be seeing you in person.
In person.
So I need to get back to my therapy, Kev, because I'm struggling with you and Budgie. I've just kind of got over the last wave. So I need to go see my doctor again.
Joe, I've got to tell you, just before you go, the way Budgie is, you're gonna need more than therapy, mate. I tell you, because he needs to unload, that guy. He needs to unload. So
you've locked, not you personally, but you've locked Budgie down on his own for the best part of 2 months with no one else to talk to. I don't know how we're going to shut him up. I honestly don't know how we're going to shut him up.
Well, you know what, Joe? I've been speaking to him off and on, so I'm all right. You're the next you're the next target for Budgie. Bless him.
You know what? I spoke to him a week ago. It was about one thing, and that conversation with anyone else on this planet would have taken maximum 5 minutes. 45 minutes, he's still going at it.
That's Budgie for you. Joe, thank you so much for your time, mate. Thank you, mate. And I'll see you soon. Thanks, Joe.
Take care, Kev.
Cheers, mate.